He sat alone in a mansion so quiet you could hear the low hum of the air conditioning echo through empty hallways, a sound that once meant comfort, but now felt like a reminder that no one was coming home. On a polished oak table lay a single wedding ring, turned on its side, catching the light from a chandelier worth more than most houses. His voice, older than his years, dropped into a whisper as if the walls themselves were listening. If I had not stopped my car that day, I would have lost my soul. This was a man whose name once moved markets, whose decisions shaped industries. Yet here he was, staring at a simple band of gold like it was evidence from another life. Why was he alone in a house built for laughter? Why did a man with everything sound like he had lost the one thing that mattered? And what happened to the woman who made him believe he could be more than his bank account? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And then if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the woman who saved him was never meant to be in his world. 6 years earlier, long before the silence, this same man, let's call him Daniel Reed, was known for speed, not patience. He drove fast, talked faster, and treated life like a schedule to be conquered. On a rainy evening outside a small Midwestern town, his driver called in sick, and Daniel insisted on driving himself. The highway lights blurred as rain tapped against the windshield, and his phone buzzed with messages he didn't read. Then he saw her. A flickering food cart on the roadside, steam rising from a dented metal pot, and a young woman shielding it with her body from the rain. Something about the smell of fried onions and hot broth slipped through the cracked window, mixing with wet asphalt and pulling his foot off the accelerator. He didn't know why he stopped. He just did. When he stepped out, his shoes sank slightly into the mud, and she looked up startled, eyes sharp but tired. "We're closing," she said quickly, then softer. "But I can make you something warm." That moment, small and ordinary, would quietly reroute everything. Her name was Emily Carter, and her world was built from routines Daniel had never noticed before. She woke before sunrise, cooked with her hands numb from cold, and counted every dollar twice before placing it in a worn envelope. She spoke plainly, laughed easily, and when Daniel handed her a bill too large for the soup she served, she frowned and pushed it back. "Pay me what it's worth," she said. That sentence lingered with him longer than any boardroom speech ever had. Over the next few weeks, Daniel found himself taking that same road, telling himself it was faster, more efficient, even though it wasn't. He listened as she talked about her late mother, about how the cart was both memory and survival. You could hear the sizzle of oil as she worked, the way she paused when she spoke of loss, the way her shoulders relaxed when she smiled. Daniel didn't tell her who he was. For the first time, he enjoyed being seen without context. Ask yourself honestly, when was the last time someone looked at you without wanting something in return? Months passed, and the secret couldn't last forever. One evening, a sleek black car pulled up, and a man in a suit stepped out, calling Daniel by name. Emily froze, ladle hovering midair. Her silence said more than anger. "You didn't think it mattered," she said later, voice steady but distant. Daniel tried to explain that he wanted something real, that he didn't want money to stand between them. She listened, then quietly said, "Truth is what makes things real." She stopped seeing him after that, and Daniel returned to his world of glass towers and constant motion, but everything felt hollow. Food tasted bland. Meetings felt loud. 6 months later, he showed up again, not with excuses, but with time. He waited in the rain like anyone else, hands cold, saying nothing until she spoke first. That night, she let him back into her life slowly, carefully, like someone who had learned what loss could do. The turning point came a year later, sudden and unfair. Emily collapsed at the cart one afternoon, the sound of metal clattering to the ground sharp enough to draw a crowd. The diagnosis came quietly in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. She had been sick longer than she admitted, pushing through pain because closing the cart meant losing everything. Daniel tried to buy time, specialists, treatments, anything money could reach, but some things don't move for anyone. In her final weeks, they talked about ordinary things. Weather, childhood memories, regrets left unspoken too long. She made him promise something simple, to stop measuring life by numbers. Before she passed away, she placed the ring in his hand, smiling faintly. "You stopped," she whispered. That mattered. After she was gone, the mansion felt larger, emptier, every echo a reminder. Daniel kept the cart, not as a business, but as a place he visited when the world felt too loud. Years later, Daniel tells this story not to impress, but to confess. He funds small vendors, slows his days, eats standing up sometimes, remembering rain and steam, and a woman who changed him without trying. He still wonders who he would have been if he hadn't stopped that night. And now I want to ask you, honestly, if you were rushing through your life and someone like Emily crossed your path, would you slow down? Would you see them? Or would you drive past, never knowing what you lost? What no one knew at the time was that Emily carried a secret far heavier than the pot she lifted every day. A truth she guarded quietly because it wasn't hers alone to expose. Daniel sensed it in the way her smile sometimes arrived a second too late, in how she went silent when certain topics came up, but he never pushed. He believed patience was a form of respect, not realizing that patience can also delay hard truths. And while their connection grew, someone close to Daniel was watching carefully, someone who believed loyalty to money mattered more than loyalty to people. A quiet betrayal was already in motion, disguised as concern, paperwork, and advice that sounded reasonable at the time. One signature, one decision Daniel made without full context, would eventually cost him his company, his reputation, and the life he thought he was building. Years later, after the headlines faded and the whispers settled, people would ask him only one question, usually in hushed tones, usually with disbelief. How did a roadside food vendor become the woman who changed your destiny? Her full name was Stella Carter, though most people called her Emily because it was easier, softer, and she never corrected them. Stella grew up counting blessings instead of money, learning early that pride could survive even when comfort could not. Her father taught her to fix things instead of throwing them away. Her mother taught her to pray before panic set in, and those habits stayed with her long after both were gone. She had been accepted into a small state college with dreams of studying nutrition and public health, believing food could heal more than hunger, but tuition deadlines don't wait for good intentions. When her mother fell ill, Stella made a choice that would never show up on a resume. She left school, took over the food cart, and told herself it was temporary, even as the months turned into years. She never begged, never hinted, never played the victim. Dignity mattered to her more than sympathy, and that quiet self-respect shaped every decision she made. Faith for Stella wasn't loud or performative. It lived in small routines. A whispered prayer before lighting the stove. A pause before answering in anger. A belief that doing the right thing still counted, even if no one noticed. Customers remembered her not because she talked much, but because she listened. She remembered names, preferences, allergies, stories. When a single mother came by short on cash, Stella adjusted portions without announcing charity. When a construction worker thanked her too much, she changed the subject. There was a steadiness to her that made people feel safe, a calm that didn't demand attention. Daniel noticed it immediately, though he couldn't explain why. Around Stella, his urgency softened. His phone stayed in his pocket longer. He found himself answering questions honestly instead of strategically. She didn't challenge him directly. She didn't need to. Her values were firm enough to speak on their own, and being near her felt like standing next to something true. What Stella didn't know was how visible integrity becomes when it refuses to bend. Her consistency, her refusal to cut corners, her insistence on doing things cleanly began to attract attention she never asked for. Permits were checked more often. Questions came from people who didn't buy food. Offers arrived that felt generous but carried strings she politely declined. To Stella, it was just noise, part of surviving in a system that rarely rewarded fairness. She believed if she stayed focused, stayed kind, stayed grounded, things would work out the way they were meant to. She didn't see how closely her life was already being observed, how her choices were being noted, discussed, and quietly evaluated by people who understood power far better than she did. And what Stella didn't know, not yet, was that someone powerful was already watching her. His legal name was Williams Reed, though most people in his inner circle had always called him Daniel, a shortened version that stuck from his early startup days, and by the time he became a billionaire, correcting people felt unnecessary. Williams was self-made in the most literal sense. No inheritance, no safety net, no second chances. He built his fortune by outworking everyone in the room, sleeping under his desk, eating cold takeout at midnight, and convincing himself that sacrifice was temporary. Years passed, the numbers grew, and the sacrifices quietly became permanent. He was surrounded by advisors, assistants, partners, and people who laughed at jokes that weren't funny, yet his penthouse was often silent. By 10 p.m. relationships never lasted because affection always felt conditional. He wondered who liked him and who liked what he could provide. Over time, distrust hardened into habit, and love began to feel like a liability he couldn't afford. Williams owned everything money could buy, yet nothing that money could keep. Art that meant nothing to him. Cars he barely drove. Homes he rarely lived in. He measured life in milestones and exits, not memories. When past relationships ended, he told himself it was focus, ambition, timing. Privately, he feared it was something worse, that intimacy required a version of himself he no longer knew how to be. He didn't believe in destiny, or soulmates, or anything that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. Life, to him, was cause and effect, effort and reward. That belief kept him safe, insulated, emotionally distant. Until one decision, made on a rainy road without analysis or strategy, rewrote his life in ways no forecast could have predicted. Williams didn't believe in destiny, until stopping his car challenged everything he thought he understood about control, connection, and what it actually means to be rich. The night Williams stopped wasn't dramatic, and that's what made it unforgettable. The road was wet, the sky low and gray, and his luxury car slowed almost against his will as the glow from a small food cart cut through the rain. He told himself he was hungry, that it was convenience, but when he stepped out, the smell of hot broth and onions wrapped around him in a way that felt unexpectedly grounding. Stella looked up, surprised but composed, wiping her hands on a towel that had seen better days. There was no recognition in her eyes, no calculation, just polite caution. He ordered something simple, and as she prepared it, he noticed she moved carefully, deliberately, as if each action mattered. When he handed her a bill far larger than the price, she paused, then pushed it back toward him. "This is too much," she said quietly. Not apologetic, not impressed, just certain. That refusal followed him all night, replaying in his mind long after the taste of the food was gone, asking a question he couldn't quite answer. Williams told himself the second stop was coincidence, the third was routine, and by the fifth, he stopped pretending. He began timing his drives differently, choosing the longer route without admitting why. Each visit was brief. A greeting, an order, a few exchanged words. Nothing that looked like attachment from the outside. Stella asked simple questions. "Long day. Still raining where you're headed?" He answered honestly, surprising himself. "Always," he said once, then corrected it to, "most days." She smiled at that, not because it was clever, but because it was real. They talked about work in plain terms. She spoke about sourcing ingredients, about keeping prices fair. He spoke about pressure, about decisions that never felt finished. Their values didn't match on paper, yet they respected the same things: effort, fairness, showing up. Every night, the distance between them shortened without either noticing the moment it happened. Stella never asked what he did beyond work in the city, and Williams never volunteered more. He liked the simplicity of being known only by his first name. Some nights they spoke less, letting the sounds fill the space between them. Rain on metal, oil simmering, cars passing without slowing. Other nights, a single sentence shifted everything. When he joked about being bad with time, she said, "People make time for what matters." It wasn't advice. It was an observation. He thought about it long after he drove away. Stella never talked about her past, and Williams never asked, both sensing that some stories reveal themselves only when they're ready. The first cracks didn't come from Stella, they came from Williams' world. A friend laughed when he mentioned the roadside stop, calling it a phase, something to joke about over drinks. A business partner grew serious, warning him about optics, about distractions, about how certain associations could invite unnecessary scrutiny. Williams brushed it off, but the comments lingered, subtle at first, then sharper. One evening, Stella overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear, words spoken carelessly but carrying weight. She stood just out of sight, listening as someone questioned Williams' judgment, reducing her to a symbol, a risk, a story to manage. Stella didn't confront him. She didn't cry. She simply grew distant. Her greetings shortened. Her smiles faded faster. Williams felt the shift, but couldn't trace its cause. He sensed something slipping, something fragile being tested. And then, without explanation, Stella closed the cart early one night. The next evening, it wasn't there at all. And then, Stella disappeared. Williams searched for Stella for days, retracing his stops, asking discreet questions, hoping someone would know. What he discovered wasn't a scandal, a trap, or a twist of luck. It was a life lived quietly with purpose and burden. Stella had given up more than he ever imagined. Her mother's illness had drained their savings, and when tuition deadlines came, she chose her family over her education, stepping into the cart not for profit, but survival. Every order she served, every smile she offered, carried the weight of responsibility she refused to burden anyone else with. Her hands were skilled not just at cooking, but at holding a life together when everything else threatened to fall apart. Williams felt the magnitude of it immediately. She had sacrificed ambition for love, labor, and duty, and no one in his world had noticed. If you're still with us, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Let's see who's really here. This revelation changed everything. The woman he thought was simple, ordinary, was extraordinary in ways he could barely comprehend, and for the first time, he realized he might have been chasing her for all the wrong reasons. Williams arrived at the empty lot where the cart once stood, briefcase in hand, offers drafted, promises ready, everything money could buy to make life easier for Stella. But when she appeared, standing in the rain as if daring him to act without understanding, she shook her head. "I don't need you to fix anything," she said, voice steady, eyes unwavering. It wasn't defiance, it was dignity. Williams felt a flicker of frustration, then a deeper unease. Was he there to help her, or to ease his own guilt for not seeing sooner? Every solution he presented, every concession he made, felt like a bandage over something that couldn't be repaired with checks or contracts. Pride, stubbornness, and genuine care collided in a tension that neither fully understood. Words failed. Actions mattered. And in that moment, staring at the woman who had shaped his soul without asking for anything in return, Williams made a decision he could never undo. Just when Williams thought he had reached Stella, the world he built pressed in. A trusted advisor, someone he considered almost family, intervened under the guise of concern. Words were whispered, warnings exaggerated, intentions misrepresented, and before he could stop it, Stella was confronted publicly, questioned about her choices in front of customers, strangers, even neighbors. The humiliation cut deeper than any insult he had ever endured in boardrooms or press rooms. She didn't yell. She didn't fight back. She simply turned, gathered what little she had, and disappeared, leaving nothing but a note with a single line: "I deserve dignity." Williams watched her go, powerless, his wealth meaningless against the force of shame and pride. For the first time in his life, money couldn't save him. Every luxury, every privilege, every strategy he had relied upon dissolved in the rain-soaked streets where she vanished, leaving him alone with the weight of regret he could not pay away. Williams returned to his mansion, but the walls felt heavier, emptier than ever. Boardrooms, private jets, accolades, they all rang hollow without Stella's presence. Every decision now seemed insignificant, every triumph a reminder of what he had lost. He tried to distract himself with work, philanthropy, even travel, but nothing filled the silence she had left behind. Meanwhile, Stella had rebuilt quietly in another town, a small corner of the world where her cart thrived again, grounded in routine, faith, and the dignity she refused to surrender. She smiled, laughed, and served her customers with the same grace as before, untouched by the chaos that had erupted around her absence. Williams realized that humility wasn't something he could buy. Timing wasn't something he could control. And pride had consequences that even billions couldn't erase. He spent long nights reflecting, confronting the stark truth that some losses were meant to teach, not to be reversed, and some lessons demanded patience he had never learned in the luxury he once trusted. Years had passed, and the city had changed, but some memories never faded. Williams found himself standing outside a new cart tucked in a quieter neighborhood, one that radiated the same warmth he remembered. The woman behind it was no longer the one who had quietly accepted his presence. Stella carried herself with the confidence of someone who had built her life on her own terms. She no longer needed him, no longer relied on his money or influence. And that realization hit him harder than any boardroom defeat. The roles had shifted. Now, if he wanted to matter in her life, it wasn't about what he could buy or provide. It was about the man he had become, the humility he had earned, the patience he had learned. Words were careful, gestures deliberate. He had to prove character, not wealth. And in that brief, quiet exchange, every choice, every failure, and every lesson he had lived through culminated in a single truth. Love isn't given to those who can afford it. It's offered to those who deserve it. They sat across from each other at a small table beside the cart, the afternoon sun soft on their shoulders. Silence stretched for a moment, heavy but not uncomfortable, until William spoke first, not with charm or persuasion, but with honesty. He admitted his mistakes, his failures, the moments he had let pride dictate his choices, and how deeply he regretted underestimating her strength. Stella listened, her eyes steady, measuring each word. Forgiveness wasn't given immediately. It was earned through presence, accountability, and the sincerity of a man who had finally learned humility. When she finally nodded, it wasn't a surrender, but an acknowledgement that change, courage, and character mattered more than wealth or power. And in that quiet exchange, Williams realized the truth he had ignored for so long. Love is not what you give when it's easy. It's who you become when it costs you. Every sacrifice, every lesson, every moment of waiting had led to this understanding. And in that realization, both found a peace neither had thought possible. In the quiet aftermath, it became clear that the most powerful forces in life are rarely measured in money or status. Kindness, patience, and integrity quietly shape destinies far more than ambition alone. Faith, both in oneself and in the goodness of others, can carry people through the hardest storms. Small decisions, stopping for a stranger, refusing to take advantage, showing respect when no one is watching, can ripple through lives in ways we cannot predict. And in the end, Williams and Stella's story reminds us that the people who change our lives are often ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in character. So, we leave you with this. Do you believe kindness can change destiny? Have you ever helped someone without knowing who they truly were? If this story touched you, like the video, it helps us reach more people. And subscribe for more powerful stories every day.